You know that feeling when you finally close the door after a long day of being around people, and the silence that follows isn't empty, it's relief. Like you can finally breathe again. Like the weight of performing, of smiling, of pretending to be interested in small talk has been lifted. And for a moment, you wonder if something is wrong with you, because most people seem to crave connection, but you crave peace. There are people who guard their energy the way others guard their homes, who've realized that being alone isn't loneliness, it's sanctuary. After decades of feeling drained by social interactions, they've made a choice, not to run away, but to protect the quiet clarity found within. Their solitude isn't fear, it's a boundary, a way of saying, my peace matters more than your approval. But here's what most people never understand. Why can some people thrive in solitude while others suffocate in it? Why does being alone feel like freedom to you when it feels like punishment to everyone else? There's a psychology behind this, a specific way your mind processes connection, energy, and meaning, that Arthur Schopenhauer understood deeply when he said that those with rich inner worlds need less from the outer one. And once you understand it, everything about your life starts to make sense in a way it never has before. Let me explain what's actually happening here. When someone closes that door and feels relief instead of loneliness, they're not broken. They're recalibrating. What if this isn't a flaw in your wiring? What if it's a design? What if the reason you feel most like yourself when you're alone is because that's when you finally stop performing and start existing? Most people assume that needing solitude means something is missing, that if you were whole, you'd want to be surrounded by others. But the truth is the opposite. People who protect their peace aren't running from connection. They're preserving the energy it takes to connect authentically. And that energy is finite. Every conversation that feels like a performance, every social gathering that drains more than it gives, every smile you put on when you'd rather be silent, it all costs something. And after years, sometimes decades, of paying that cost, you've learned to ask a question most people never consider. Is this worth it? The answer, for you, is often no. Not because you hate people, but because you've discovered something most of the world is too distracted to notice. That peace isn't something you find in a crowded room. It's something you protect in the quiet spaces you create for yourself. But here's the interesting part. This isn't about being antisocial or broken. It's about having what psychologists call high internal self-presence. Your inner world is so rich, so complete, that it doesn't need constant external validation to feel real. Where others might feel empty in silence, you feel full. Where others need noise to feel alive, you need quiet to feel like yourself. Your nervous system isn't wired to thrive in chaos. It's wired to thrive in stillness. And that's not a weakness. That's a different kind of strength. It wasn't always this way. I remember someone telling me once that if I didn't force myself to socialize more, I'd regret it, that I'd end up lonely and bitter, isolated from the world. And for years, I believed them. I tried. I went to gatherings I didn't want to attend. I made plans I hoped would get cancelled. I smiled through conversations that felt like work. And the whole time, I thought something was wrong with me, because everyone else seemed to enjoy this. Everyone else seemed energized by the very things that left me exhausted. But then something shifted. I stopped asking, why don't I enjoy this? And started asking, why should I? And that question changed everything. Because the truth is, there's no rule that says you have to enjoy crowded rooms to live a meaningful life. There's no law that says you have to have a packed social calendar to be whole. The idea that connection always looks like parties and group chats and constant availability, that's a story society tells. But it's not the only story. And it's certainly not your story. Their preference for solitude wasn't a flaw. It was a form of self-knowledge, a recognition that their energy is precious, and not everyone deserves access to it. That being alone isn't the same as being lonely. That solitude is also a way of living, a way of saying, I choose peace over performance. I choose clarity over chaos. I choose myself. Still, here's a curiosity. Why is it that the people who love being alone are often the ones society judges the most harshly? Why is introversion treated like something to fix, while extroversion is celebrated as the default? After decades of trying to enjoy crowded rooms, of forcing themselves to fit into spaces that never felt right, these people have made a radical choice. They've stopped apologizing for who they are. And that, more than anything, is what makes others uncomfortable. Because when you choose solitude, you're not just choosing to be alone. You're choosing to reject the idea that your worth is measured by how many people you know, how busy your calendar is, how often you show up to things you don't want to attend. You're saying, my peace matters more than your expectations. And that's threatening. Not because it's wrong, but because it's free. Society glorifies the extrovert, the person who can walk into any room and make friends, the person who thrives on interaction, who gets energy from being around others, and there's nothing wrong with that. But somewhere along the way, we started treating that as the only way to be, as if needing solitude is a symptom of something broken, as if preferring your own company means you're missing out on life. But what if the opposite is true? What if the people who protect their peace aren't missing out at all? What if they've simply found something most people spend their whole lives searching for? The ability to be content with themselves. Here's a secret they rarely say out loud. The reason they guard their energy so carefully isn't because they hate people. It's because they've learned, often the hard way, that not all connection is nourishing, that some interactions leave you feeling more alone than if you'd stayed home. That there's a difference between being surrounded by people and being truly seen. And once you understand that difference, once you feel it in your bones, you can't unsee it. You can't go back to pretending that shallow connection is better than deep solitude. So what are they protecting themselves from? 3 things. First, the exhaustion that comes from constant performance. Every social interaction requires a version of yourself that isn't quite real. A version that's polite, agreeable, interested in things you don't care about. And maintaining that version is draining. It's work. Unpaid, unrecognized work. And after decades of doing it, you've realized, I don't want to work this hard just to exist in spaces that don't feel like home. Second, they're protecting themselves from the emptiness of surface-level connection. Because here's the truth. You can be surrounded by people and still feel completely alone. In fact, that kind of loneliness, the loneliness of being unseen in a crowd, is often worse than being physically alone. At least when you're alone, you're not pretending. At least when you're alone, you can breathe. And third, they're protecting their sanctuary. Because for people like this, home isn't just a place. It's a refuge, a space where they don't have to perform, don't have to explain, don't have to justify their need for quiet. It's where they recharge, where they think, where they feel most like themselves. And protecting that space isn't selfish, it's survival. Your dog doesn't judge your silence. Your cat doesn't drain your energy. The walls of your home don't ask you to be someone you're not. And that, more than anything, is what you're protecting. The freedom to exist without performance. If you are someone who feels relief when plans are cancelled, who finds peace in solitude, who guards your energy like it's the most valuable thing you own, you're not broken. You're not missing out. You're not doing life wrong. You've simply learned something most people never will. That peace is worth protecting. That your energy is finite. That not all connection is worth the cost. Let me shift for a moment and speak directly to you. Not about you. To you. What if nothing is wrong? What if the reason you feel most alive when you're alone isn't because you're broken, but because you're finally being honest? What if the world needs more people like you? People who know the difference between loneliness and solitude. People who refuse to trade their peace for approval. People who understand that being alone isn't the same as being lonely. I spent years thinking I was broken. I'd watch people around me laugh in groups, make plans, text constantly, and I'd wonder, why don't I want that? Why does the idea of a weekend full of social plans feel like a prison sentence instead of a gift? And for the longest time, I thought something was missing in me, that I was defective, that if I just tried harder, I'd learn to enjoy the things everyone else seemed to love. But the truth is, I wasn't broken. I was just different, and different isn't wrong. Schopenhauer understood this when he wrote about the inverse relationship between sociability and inner richness. He wasn't saying that introverts are better than extroverts. He was saying that people with deep, complex inner worlds often need less from the outer one, not because they're cold or disconnected, but because they're already full, because their thoughts, their solitude, their quiet moments, those things aren't empty, they're alive. And if that's you, if you've spent years wondering why you don't crave what everyone else craves, let me tell you, you're not broken. You're not missing out. You're not doing life wrong. You've simply learned to find richness in places most people never look. And that's not a flaw. That's a gift. At 50, 60, 70 years old, you've earned the right to choose peace over performance. You've earned the right to say no without guilt. You've earned the right to protect your energy, your time, your sanctuary. And anyone who tells you otherwise doesn't understand what it's like to live in a world that constantly demands more than you have to give. Solitude is a state of mind. It's not about being physically alone. It's about being emotionally present with yourself. It's about choosing quiet over noise, depth over distraction, peace over chaos. And once you understand that, once you stop apologizing for it, everything changes. Because you stop waiting for the world to validate your choices. You stop needing permission to live the way you want to live. You stop feeling guilty for protecting the one thing that keeps you whole, your peace. And now it's time to talk directly to you. Maybe you are one of these people. Maybe you've spent years feeling like you're on the outside of something everyone else seems to understand. Maybe you've wondered if there's something wrong with you because you don't feel lonely when you're alone. Maybe you felt guilty for preferring your own company to the company of others. And if that's you, I want you to hear this. You're not broken. It doesn't mean you never get lonely. It doesn't mean you don't value connection. It means you've learned the difference between solitude and loneliness. Solitude is chosen. Loneliness is not. Solitude is peaceful. Loneliness is painful. And the fact that you can be alone without being lonely, that's not a flaw. That's emotional maturity. That's self-awareness. That's strength. There's a difference between rest and laziness, between solitude and isolation, between protecting your peace and running from life. And you know the difference. You feel it. When you're alone, you're not hiding, you're recharging, you're not avoiding, you're choosing. And that choice, the choice to prioritize your peace over other people's expectations, that's one of the bravest things you can do. Because it means you've stopped living for approval and started living for yourself. While others fear missing out, you've discovered the joy of opting out, the joy of saying no, the joy of staying home when everyone else is out, the joy of quiet Saturday nights, of books instead of bars, of your own company instead of crowds. And that's not something to apologize for, that's something to celebrate. Because most people spend their whole lives chasing external validation, never realizing that the peace they're looking for can only be found within. But you've already found it. You're already there. And protecting your peace gives you strength. It gives you clarity. It gives you the freedom to live on your own terms. There is something important still waiting to be said. Something about the way people like this move through the world. Something about the quiet power they carry, even when no one else sees it. Let's go deeper into the psychology. Because there are 4 things happening beneath the surface that most people never understand. First, there's energy management. People who protect their peace aren't antisocial. They're energy conscious. They know that every interaction costs something, and they've learned to spend their energy wisely. They don't waste it on small talk, on shallow connections, on people who take more than they give. They save it for the things that matter, for the people who matter, for themselves. Second, there's trust and vulnerability. After decades of performing socially, of pretending to be interested in things they're not, of smiling through conversations that feel like work, they've learned something painful. Most people don't actually want to know you. They want to know the version of you that makes them comfortable. And once you realize that, once you feel the exhaustion of constantly editing yourself to fit into spaces that were never meant for you, you stop trying. Not because you're bitter, but because you're tired and you'd rather be alone and real than surrounded and fake. Third, there's the complexity of their inner life. People who thrive in solitude often have incredibly rich internal worlds. They think deeply, they feel deeply, they process the world in layers that most people never access. And that depth requires space. It requires quiet. It requires time alone to sort through the noise and find the clarity beneath it. Their solitude isn't empty. It's full of thoughts, of reflections, of meaning. And that fullness doesn't need external validation to feel real. And fourth, there's control over their environment. For people like this, their home is their sanctuary. It's the one place where they have complete control, where they don't have to perform, don't have to explain, don't have to justify their existence. And protecting that space isn't about fear, it's about wisdom. After a lifetime of performing socially, of giving more than they had to give, they've learned that peace is something you create, not something you find. And they've created it in the quiet corners of their own lives. Sometimes, the reason they love being alone is because the world once disappointed them. Not in one big, dramatic way, but in 1,000 small ways. In the friendships that faded, in the conversations that felt empty, in the realization that most people don't actually care about the things you care about. And once you've felt that disappointment enough times, you stop expecting the world to fill you up. You stop waiting for other people to make you feel whole. You learn to do it yourself. And that's not sad, that's powerful. Because it means you're no longer at the mercy of other people's presence or absence. You're no longer dependent on external validation to feel okay. You've learned to be your own source of peace. And that's the kind of emotional wisdom most people spend their whole lives searching for. Picture this. You're standing at your window, watching life continue outside. Cars passing, people walking. The world moving at a pace that once felt urgent but now feels distant. And you're not sad, you're not lonely. You're just here, in the quiet, in the stillness, in the peace you've spent years learning to protect. And it feels right, not because you hate the world, but because you've learned that you don't need to be part of every moment to live a meaningful life. Society glorifies busyness as if rest is failure, as if staying home means you're missing out, as if solitude is something to fix. But rest is part of growth. Stillness is part of clarity, and solitude is part of becoming who you really are. The people who understand this, who've learned to find peace in their own company, aren't broken. They're awake. They've stopped chasing a version of life that was never meant for them, and they've started living the one that is. There's a quality most people never talk about: self-companionship. The ability to be with yourself without distraction, without noise, without needing someone else to make the moment feel real. And that's rare. Most people can't sit with themselves for 5 minutes without reaching for their phone, without turning on the TV, without filling the silence with something, anything, to avoid being alone with their own thoughts. But you've learned to sit in that silence, to breathe in it, to find peace in it. And that's not something to apologize for. That's something to honor. Your cat curled beside you understands more than most people ever will. Because animals don't ask you to perform. They don't judge your silence. They don't drain your energy. They just exist with you. And sometimes that's all you need. Not a crowd, not a conversation, just presence, just peace. You are not strange for choosing solitude. You are not broken for preferring your own company. You are not missing out for staying home when everyone else is out. You are not cold for guarding your energy. You are not selfish for protecting your peace. You are not wrong for needing quiet in a world that glorifies noise. You are not failing at life because you've stopped trying to live the way everyone else does. You are building a life that doesn't exhaust you, a life that feels true, even if it looks different. A life where peace isn't something you chase, but something you create. And that takes courage, because it means you've stopped living for approval and started living for yourself. It means you've stopped apologizing for who you are and started honoring it. And that's not easy, but it's worth it. One day, you might open that door again, not because you're forced to, not because you feel guilty, but because you choose to, because you found someone or something that doesn't drain you, that doesn't require you to perform, that feels like peace instead of work. And when that day comes, you'll know. Because it won't feel like a chore. It won't feel like a performance. It will feel like an extension of the peace you've already found within yourself. And until that day comes, you're not waiting. You're not missing out. You're living on your own terms, in your own way. And that's more than enough. You've earned this peace after decades of trying to fit into spaces that were never meant for you, after years of performing, of pretending, of giving more than you had to give. You finally learned to say no, to protect your energy, to choose yourself. And that's not selfish. That's survival. That's wisdom. That's freedom. And anyone who tells you otherwise has never had to fight for their own peace the way you have. If this resonates with you, if you want to go even deeper into understanding why solitude feels like home and connection feels like work, there's more waiting for you here. Another conversation, another layer, just for you. This is Alone Together, a quiet corner of the internet for people who choose solitude over half-hearted connections. If you're here, you're not broken, you're just built differently, and you're not alone in being alone.